Hello PLO Order, new video, new topic. This week's topic is how to play flop when 3-betting out of position and the board is Jack-10-5 single suited. And the situation that we find ourselves is this. We are on the small blind. Everyone folds, but button who opens, we 3-bet, and button calls heads up, flop is Jack-10-5. What is our overall strategy? How to play certain things. So let's see how to approach the situation. First thing is talk about frequencies. And here are the frequencies with 75% pot size bet, 3/4. And the way I chose this sizing is that here is a simulation of the situation where small blind versus button. And first one, I made a run with two sizings, 3/4 and a pot size. I don't think solver would like to use small sizings on those dynamic boards that much. And in reality, I don't think you should have a small sizing on that board. It's incredibly hard to have multiple sizings and have balance in each of those. But here we can see that 3/4 is favored a lot over pot. And if small blind bets, then the button raises either 3/4 or a pot. So it's kind of 50-50 mix. But if small blind checks, then if button bets, it's pretty much always 3/4. So to make things easier, and we can see some tendencies without having two different sizings, what I did, I made a run with just 3/4. That's why we have 3/4 frequencies here to get the overall strategy. And the thing is that small blind's range hits that flop stronger than button. Button has wide range. Small blind 3-betting range connects with Jack-10 very often. So in solver, the overall small blind strategy is to bet around 60% with 3/4. The thing is that if we use only pot size, here's a sim where the only option is pot size, then it's 55% frequency. So it goes down a little because the bet is bigger. But 3/4, we can see that it c-bets often. And then if checked, button is betting 35% and checking back 65%. And if small blind bets, so we bet, then in solver strategy, button should fold half of his hands and call and raise the remaining half, split to 25-26. And if small blind checks and button bets, then small blind is folding around half of hands, calling 36 and check raising 16, which is very value heavy. But we check as a small blind 40% and then fold half of that if button bets. So overall on this board, small blind is check folding 20% of the hands only. So 80% of hands small blind is playing in some way, it's not folding it. So it shows how well small blind's 3-betting range should hit this board. And then if small blind goes for check raise, then button is going to go all in 65%. And if we go back a little, we can see that versus check, button is tapping 35%. And out of that 35, 65% is going all in. So around 25% or so. So if button bets, then it's going to stack off 2 out of 3 times. So it still has 35% of bet folding hands, which are bluffs mostly. Now, this is the solver strategy. There are a few problems. One, your opponent is not playing solver strategy. It goes south in pre-flop because his pre-flop calling range will not be what solver thinks. Because there's no phone equity and he's 4-betting pretty much only pocket aces. So the pre-flop range is a bit different. So we could do another simulation. How would solver play if opponent range is different? So it would only 4-bet aces and call with everything. But the problem is that then opponent is playing far from solver strategy anyway. So to use solver strategy is not optimal. But what we can see here is solver is betting a lot, and out of his checking range, it's still going to play half of his hands. Check raising, few strong hands, check calling with the rest. So now we need to form a strategy. We could use the solver strategy if you memorize everything, see what kind of hands solver plays. We will see in a bit different types of hands. But if we want to make money and optimize the money making procedure, then strategy should be based on your opponent. And if the opponent is unknown, then we use our standard strategy, as stated on the previous videos. How do we play the spot versus unknown? Your standard strategy is pretty much based on the player pool, your skills. But you should have standard strategy after 3-betting from versus unknown button. How do we play Jack 10-5 in general with the hand that we actually have? If you don't know your standard line, then better work with it. You need standard strategy. Because when the opponent is known, we know the opponent. We have some reads, any information, so he's not totally unknown. We can start to adjust the strategy. So if we know that opponent plays solver strategy is a good rec, then we probably want to play close to solver strategy ourselves to defend ourselves. But if opponent doesn't play solver strategy, we can exploit him because he is unbalanced. And versus 99% of players at small stakes, the last sentence is the truth. Your opponent are so far from solver strategies that don't go for defense, go for offense. John Doe, our average small stakes player. Average player doesn't fold as much as solver, either pre-flop or on the flop. On the flop, if we see that solver strategy for the button is folding some hands that in reality players are not. Average player doesn't bet as much as solver. If we check after 3-betting, the button is not betting as often as solver would. There are rarely any bluffs in his range. And if we bet, the button doesn't raise as much as solver. Very often, even when people have some kind of combo draw, they are happy to call. See the turn. They raise only for value. So, John Doe is sticky, passive, and value heavy. And if we play small stakes, this should be our primary adjustment, or even our standard strategy should be based on this. John Doe doesn't care about probabilities and equities that much. If he thinks he has outs, he's going to call. He's not making aggressive moves in 3-bet pots. And if he's aggressive, he is very value heavy. So, let's open up the spot versus John Doe. This button now is our John Doe. Let's say average PLO 20, PLO 25 player. If we bet here, let's say we bet that 3/4, then button is going to call pretty much any Jack-10 overpair 2-pair sets or raise. His continuation range is 10 plus. He's never found in a flush draw. He's never found in a straight draw in general. So we go to range distribution, and here we have his calling range or continuation range, 10 plus, 8-9 plus diamonds. And we can instantly see that he's going to have something from this range 80% of times, which gives us 20% fold equity. John Doe's range is 50% minus aces. If we change his preflop range to be tighter, 40%, it just goes up. Now it's 81%. So it doesn't matter about how much he opens from the button, he's going to have a piece of this board around 80% of times, which gives only 20% fold equity. And now, if we go back, we rewind, then button versus c-bet should fold 49%. In reality, it's probably close to 20%. So there's a huge difference in fold equity. And therefore, the first adjustment I would make on this board compared to solver strategy is to pretty much bet for value. We could have some bluffs, but as we don't have fold equity, I wouldn't like. We need like 40% fold equity. And if we have any backdoors, we have any runner, cut shot on the flop, we could also check, because opponent is going to check back quite often. So let's put this aside, and let's say that if we check, we change a little, we check. Now probably button is going to bet any 10-5 plus for sure. 2 pairs or better, and he would probably bet wraps with a flush draw. And that's around 20% of his range. So 80% of times he's going to check back. So once we check, we will often see the turn. There's no point in semi-bluffing versus average players on Jack-10-5, because Jack-10-5 is a very special board. Jack-10 combines with cards above it, it combines a lot with cards below it. So it's really hard to have a hand that misses this board. It's kind of board that hits almost every hand. So we can happily check. No reason to bet any weak hands, like pocket kings with diamonds without any additional equity. Or we could actually stack off, but let's say a king high flush draw without any equity. Backup equity. So we go c-betting with value hands, and once we bet, as it's value heavy range, it should be a range that we are always calling if opponent shoves. So in real life, I wouldn't have bet folding range on this board when the SPR is 3.5. If we bet, we're going to get it in, which leads to another situation: should we always put it? I don't think it matters whether we bet 18 or 24 to opponent's calling range, unless we want to induce versus aggressive players. That's different, but versus average John Doe's. The good thing is that if we bet full pot and he calls, now we can shove the turn. So if the turn is good for us, we can shove. We don't have to play the river. But if we bet here only 18, and he calls. Pot is 60, we have 70 behind. Now it creates those nasty situations that we bet, and he calls, and river is horrible. Or if he has a flush draw, he's going to call the turn, but he might fold the river. We miss value. So pay attention to stack to pot ratio, especially out of position. You don't want to play rivers out of position. So if with slightly bigger sizing, you can create a situation where you can shove the turn, I would go for bigger sizing. So let's see about this 3/4 sizing. First thing is that what kind of value hands are we checking on Jack 10-5 if we play solver strategy? We can see that pocket jacks is pretty much 2/3 a bet, and 1 out of 3 times we check the top set, which goes against the nature of most players. You flop the top set in 3-bet pot on a board where opponent doesn't really fold often. Should we go for it or not? Well, let's say that we don't have a range. We have a jack-jack. Well, let's give ourselves nice aces and jacks. And then the button continuation range was 10 plus, 9-8 plus, and diamonds. So how much does the jack blockers affect? I put it on the wrong street. So our jack blocker doesn't even decrease the fold equity. It's still just 20%. So he's going to call almost always. So solver strategy versus real life money making strategy versus average John Doe is to bet all of your top sets and just get the value. Get a blank turn, shove it in, win stack. Remember, opponent is not folding as often, and it's not bluffing as often if we check. So going to check raise with Jack 8, Ace, Jack Ace 9 type of hands. So there's a lot of pocket jacks with some Broadway cards. So pocket jacks with additional equity, pocket jacks with flush draws. Like we can see that on our betting jacks, we don't really have any jacks with flush draw. We don't have any jacks with Broadway cards. King Jack 9 with cut shots there are, but Ace King Jack is a check. So it splits the pocket jacks. One tendency is that the more backup equity pocket jacks, more you have along with pocket jacks, the more it's going to check raise. And the more try pocket jacks, pocket tens, pocket fives you have, the more it's going to bet. But in reality, if you have any set, bet. Because you miss value if you start to check raise pocket jacks. If the opponent is very good, then it's a whole new thing, but PLO 50 and lower, you shouldn't be facing too many solver strategies on this board. People still play very honestly. So, if small blind checks, we can see here that button should bet King 4-4 deuce type of hands. Deuce 3-3. King 2 deuce 3. I mean, complete there. And I would say that if button average John Doe opens, small blind 3 bets and check 10-5, and the player has King 3-3 deuce with backup spades or backdoor spades, he's not going to bet big here. Deuce 4-3, Queen 4 deuce. I mean, Queen 8 deuce without flush draw. People are happy to check. So that's the thing. Solver assumes that big blind should bet ace 4 deuce deuce here. Button should bet ace 4 deuce deuce. So that's why it goes check raise with the strong hands. In reality, button is not. So really good example of situation where playing solver strategy prevents you from making profits. And this is what I've been trying to tell people for a long time. Solver strategy is not optimal. Don't think you have to play solver strategy to make money. Solver strategy is defense. By betting pocket jacks 100% of times on the flop on small blind, that's offense. That's how you make money. When you get up in stakes and when the button is good enough to bet complete air 4-4 deuce 3 on the flop versus your check, that's when you need to start to protect your checking range. But if opponent is not attacking your check, no reason to protect it. So it's important to understand when we use solver strategy and when we don't, and why solver strategy makes certain things. I mean, now button bets. Now here we have what kind of hands small blind check raises. And there are like ace ace king 5, overpair and gut shot goes for check raise, ace king queen without the flush draw, and then some Broadway cards with flush draws, of course, for value. But interesting to see. Pretty much check raising hands either have flush draw or jacks tens, and then there are some weird hands that ace 3-3-5 goes for check raise. Well, it makes sense because solver assumes button is tapping very lively with his air on the flop, which he shouldn't because 3-better rarely misses this board. So you can go for balance strategy if opponent is tab happy, aggressive. It's also a board where aggressive players, when you check, they think you have try aces, so they think they have all equity. They can actually bet somewhat weakish range like naked 7 high flush draws. And then you check raise and get it in versus bad range. But the thing is that versus that same range, you probably get money in by betting yourself. He calls you shove third. So we don't achieve by checking anything unless the opponent stabs with air. So then we check to induce that stab. And we need to protect our checking range because otherwise, every time we check, opponent could exploit us. But the big question is, if we check, does the opponent exploit us? And when we were discussing about to form a strategy, we go forward a little, forming a strategy. Strategy should be based on opponent. The main question on this situation that you need to ask yourself before you make anything on the flop, if I check, is my opponent betting complete air? Because that's the key question. If he is bluffing with total air, then we at least need to consider checking some stronger hands, and then we need to balance our checking range. If opponent is not attacking our checks, no reason to protect checking range. Checking range is the hands we give up. And with the 80% of hands, we're going to go for value and print money. So, if you waited to see exact hands, what to bet, what to check, you didn't get that was overall strategy. We could go through a lot of hands here, like what kind of hands. Let's say we have 9-8 of, let's go back a little. 9-8 of diamonds, betting 82% of times. Make it simplified. Just c-bet any straight draw and flush draw. What about naked Jack 10? Well, Jack 10 overall bets 83% of times, and the ones we check, most of those are with the flush draw. There are some Jack 10 8-6, but Jack 10 8-9 is a bet. So once again, simplified. You could bet most of them. Check the crappy ones and the strongest ones, like Ace, King, Jack 10, King, Queen, Jack 10 with the flush draw. Check raise those ones if you want to have balanced checking range. Yeah, it's a dynamic board, and the thing is, if we go for equity graph, why it's so weird? Oh, because we have a Jack 10 there. That's why it was so weird. So now it looks normal one. This is the equity and different kinds of hand. We can see that the blue line is the small blind actually. Here on solver is button and big blind, but the sim is made for small blind versus button. Small blind range is quite ahead on this flop. So this flop favors small blind range a lot on solver ranges. If we go with, I think, small blind has 3-bet range of 10% here, and button has 50% opening range, would 4-bet only aces. So why can't I see the graph? Well, can't get it in here. But we can see that on this board, the small blind's 3-betting range in Portu's range is 10%, very close to solver's 9.6. It's virtually the same. The average equity is 57.43, so almost 60-40. So this flop favors small blind a lot. And therefore small blind should be quite aggressive. It would be that if the board was 10-5-4 kind of board, it would change different situations. Jack 10-5 suited, it's an action board, because almost any hand hits it. But I hope the video gives you some kind of ideas how to form the strategy. Instead of just going through individual hands, it's important to understand the overall strategy. How do I approach this board? Flop is Jack 10-5. What kind of board that is? How the board texture affects everything? What kind of opponent we have? Should we play balanced or should we just exploit opponent? Those are the decisions you have to do. And you don't learn the answers to those decisions if you just go through PLO Visions or Preflop Helper or any kind of solver software and see how solver plays. Because solver strategy is not optimal. It's a great tool which you should have. You should work for it to understand how to defend yourself when opponents become better. But you also need to know how to attack, how to make money. And when you understand the situations where solver strategy is not optimal and why, it's easier for you to adjust and then form a strategy to know when to use solver strategy, when to exploit, when to deviate from it. And I hope this video shows you that on one specific board, how to form a strategy, what to think. And if you want to know the exact hands, like how would solver play a certain hand, then just hit me up on Discord and ask, and I can check it out. the sims are done so we can use them. Alright. That's all for now. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you at least got your brain working, then great, the video made you a better player. I see you on the next video. Remember to vote on the Discord. Have a safe trip home. Thanks and bye bye.